the nature of your emergency?
Welcome back to the Tactical Living Podcast. I'm your host, Ashley Walton, joined by Sergeant Walton. Glenn, how are you?
I'm good.
You're still getting over a cold. You're still coughing. You still have cooties. Knock it off.
I know. I'm. This is just allergies now.
I know.
This is just allergies.
Yeah, keep your face away from me. You know, I was talking to a police officer, and I messaged him this morning, and it's because he was kind of updating me with some things, and he had said that he was off tonight. And so I asked him, you're only off one day? Because before, I know that he was supposed to be off 2 days. And so to me, that tells me he's taking on more shifts. And so to only give himself 1 day off every single week, especially with everything else that he's doing, it had me thinking about how a lot of people, officers especially, they're living for that next shift. And it's important for us to talk about when the job becomes your only anchor.
Yeah, I think if you only identify as, like, in law enforcement as your police officer, or you're trying to strive for that paycheck and living in that circle to where you're at work more than you're ever at home, like, it's not healthy.
I know that so many people in law enforcement, fire, EMS, work isn't just a career. It's where purpose and belonging and their identity live. But I think it's important for us to talk about what happens when your sense of stability depends entirely on your next shift, or when you feel lost or even restless on your days off.
It's because you're not learning, and that's why I think it's so important to have, outside of your daily routine, especially for work, and that self-identification process of who you are outside of the badge. Because when you're only living the badge and that lifestyle, you're never going to have that difference for yourself.
Yeah, and I want us to take a little bit of a deep dive into why so many first responders become psychologically tethered to their job, and how you can actually build a life that's anchored in so much more than just your next call.
I think it really is because you start having those connections. You start having those genuine brotherhoods and sisterhoods, and to where you start believing that's your only family. And this is one thing I think I had this realization a long time ago. Like, yeah, you have a good connection. You're tied in with your partners. You'll do anything and everything for each and every one of them. But when it comes down to it, say you were to retire, how many people are still going to be with you?
Yeah, so Clint, I'm going to share a concept with you that as a police officer for as long as you have been, you've probably never heard it in a single one of your trainings before, and it's actually called intermittent reinforcement. And a lot of the times, first responder work will tap into this very powerful behavioral loop, and it's the same psychological mechanism that actually drives addiction. So you don't know when the next adrenaline rush or life-saving call or afternoon will come, but when it does, it reinforces your brain's attachment to the job.
That's really interesting, because you don't hear that. And I think in law enforcement and just the first responder and realm in general, we don't take enough time to create that deference for our officers, our teams, to where we do everything that's unifying. We bring everybody together all the time, but we never encourage that separation either.
Yeah, and something that is unintentionally being done when officers are trained or officers are out there on the job, probably every single time that you go in for briefing, is something called operant conditioning. And so over time, the mind begins to equate the job with purpose, control, and your personal value. And that level of conditioning can make life outside of the uniform feel super dull, meaningless, even unstable. And I see that all the time because it creates this dangerous imbalance between your professional purpose and your personal fulfillment.
Yeah, I think you start leading into, having different ways of where you're always striving for that next shift. You're always striving for that next adrenaline dump. You're always striving for something at work instead of striving to go home, striving to be with your family.
Yeah, totally. So there are ways for us to see if this is you, if you're falling into this trap. And I feel like one of them is if you feel lost in your days off, maybe your unstructured time makes you feel super anxious or even restless. I know for me personally, I have struggled with this a lot. That might be a sign that you are actually living for that next shift, or maybe you struggle to enjoy the simple moment. So relaxation might feel like laziness. I wrote all of this. I guess I wrote it about myself because I think that there are a lot of people who get caught up in that to where you're always scanning for that next mission.
Yeah, I think we get so caught up in trying to always progressively move forward instead of just standing still and being in that moment, because it's always easy to keep that movement going, and it's not always easy just to sit still and say, okay, where am I at right now?
I was having a conversation a few weeks ago with an officer, and I called him out a little bit, and I said, every time we talk, like, I'm so excited to hear all the stories that you have to share, but I also noticed that all of your stories are about the people at work, and I never hear you talk about the people in your family life, your personal life. And I called him out with the intention of him understanding that maybe there's something to explore here, because for many people, family time actually feels super foreign when you're caught up in this, and it could be a lot easier to connect with coworkers than your own family.
I also think too, we give ourselves excuses because when you're at work, especially, you don't talk about your family. You don't want people to know that you have a wife, you have kids. You worry about that dynamic of someone coming after them. So you start creating that separation even more so, and you start giving yourself excuses as to why you're not incorporating your family into your daily life.
I think that's really important to just pause on for a second and really just pick apart a little bit, because that happens a lot. And I think that it's a perfect example of the call out that I made to that officer, because I know more about what's going on with this individual. And so it made it a little easier to have that kind of call out. But there are so many people to where you recognize, like, hey, I know they have a wife, I know they have kids, but they're never sharing anything about them. They didn't say like, oh yeah, I took my kid to up to Big Bear for the mountains over the weekend, or like, those are the types of normal conversations that people have when they have more going on that they're emotionally involved in at home than at work.
Yeah, and I think what we end up doing is you start treating your partners like you would like a citizen that you've never met, and you start creating that division in your own brain of this is my private life, this is my public life, and then at some point it flips. This
is going to be a hard pill for a lot of people to swallow, but something else that I see, because I can hear your excuses now, but a lot of people, they'll plan their life around their schedule and not the other way around. So their days off are just time to recover and not time to live.
And you're absolutely right. Because the first thing that started coming to my mind too is a whole bunch of excuses that I've heard from people. And in hearing that, it's like, why do we focus so hard on work and so hard on doing the next thing compared to actually living our lives? And instead of, investing all that time and effort into our jobs, our careers, we invest it into our families, into actually living our life experience.
Yeah. And, working hard enough and planning a trip around, being able to explore the world outside of the United States, visiting other countries, you'll see just how backwards the United States has it, and how we are literally unique in that regard, and one of the only countries that does. And there are ways to rebuild that balance outside of the badge. And I think it is so important to reconnect with your non-work identity. So you are so much more than your title. I don't care if you're living behind that thin blue line or that thin red line. I promise you that it's much more important to explore your passions, your friendships, things that are not related to what you do for work than work will ever be.
Yeah, I think it's important to create that division, that those hobbies, that self-identity of who you are outside of the badge.
I know for me, I am so ritualistic, and there are so many people who are first responders or, serve in the military that are the same way because of that level of conditioning. For me, that level of conditioning came from a very strict father in particular, but a very strict upbringing. And so I think it's important that if you identify that that's how you too are, for you to be able to create structure in your downtime by setting routines on days off that still bring you purpose without the pressure. So if you're planning it ahead of time and things are already laid out on your schedule, things like gym, hobbies, community work, family, like whatever it is, then it lifts that pressure and it allows you to just be in the experience.
And I think it's important to not only have those, but don't replace one thing with another. And what I mean by that is, we start having that self-identification of who we are behind the badge, but then say, because I know people is like, oh, I'm a gym rat. I go to the gym all the time. And then that's who you are. You start looking for that self-identification, but not, it's always pushing it to something else, not who you are as an individual.
I hope you've gotten some value out of today's episode. If you have, do us a favor, drop a review, subscribe down below. And as always, know that I'm sending you a long, tight hug from my home to yours.